The cathedral was packed, but the air was so still it felt like no one was breathing. People sat frozen in the pews, nuns, choir members, laymen, and guests, unsure if what they just heard was real. The ancient walls, once echoing with hymns and prayers, now held the weight of one woman's cry. "I'm pregnant," Sister Maria said, her voice shaking but loud. "And the man responsible stands there, dressed as your shepherd." Gasps. Someone dropped their prayer book. Eyes turned to Father Samuel, who stood stiffly near the altar, his expression unreadable. "He called me into his office," Maria continued, her hands trembling as they clutched her rosary. "He said he was concerned about my soul, about my faith, about my loyalty. But what he wanted was power, control. My silence." Whispers erupted throughout the congregation. No one moved. Even the organist's hand remained frozen over the keys. "I was silent for weeks," she said. "Afraid. Ashamed. And then I realized I didn't sin. He did. I may be carrying a child, but he's carrying a lie." Father Samuel finally spoke. "This is slander," he said coldly. "She's delusional. I've watched this woman fall under dangerous influence. Foreign books. Foreign faith. She turned away from Christ, and now she wants to drag us all down." "I turned toward God," Maria snapped. "The real God. The one who hears without priests. The one I found in the Qur'an." Stunned silence swept through the crowd. "I said the Shahida 2 months ago," she announced. "I accepted Islam in private, because I knew what it would cost me. And I was right. He found out. And instead of saving my soul, he tried to break me." From the far back pews, a young man stood up. He looked barely 18, dressed in a modest gray hoodie, a paperback Qur'an visible in his side pocket. His face was calm, but his eyes were filled with something stronger than surprise, resolve. "May I say something?" the boy asked. A few heads turned. Some frowned. Others whispered, "Who is he?" Father Samuel scoffed. "A visitor. A guest from some interfaith program. Sit down, boy. This isn't your religion. This is church business." But Sister Maria looked directly at him and nodded. "Speak." The boy stepped forward slowly. "My name is Yusuf," he said. "And with all due respect, you don't get to silence her now. You silenced her then. She's not alone anymore." Father Samuel's eyes narrowed. "So now Islam invades our church too? With your beards and bombs and backwards laws?" Yusuf didn't flinch. "I didn't come to argue. I came to listen. But when someone cries out in pain, we're taught not to walk away. Islam commands us to speak for the oppressed, even against our own people. Even against ourselves." Maria looked at Yusuf, then back at the congregation. "This young man," she said, "has shown me more compassion in 3 minutes than this church has in 3 months." One woman stood up in the second row. "Sister Maria, we all want the truth. But how can we trust someone who left our faith and then accuses our priest?" "Because I didn't leave truth," Maria said. "I finally found it." Gasps again. But she was unshaken now. The tremble in her voice had turned to fire. "I read the Qur'an when no one was watching," she said. "I read that Mary is honored more in Islam than in most churches I've stepped into. I read that modesty is not a cage, but a shield. I read that God is near, not locked behind a curtain." A few people looked confused. Others intrigued. "But if Islam is so peaceful," someone else said loudly, "why are you still bleeding from its doorstep?" Yusuf stepped forward again. What hurt her wasn't Islam. It was a man who feared the light she found. Just like Pharaoh feared Moses. Just like the pagans feared Muhammad. Truth threatens power. And Father Samuel saw a threat in her belief. Father Samuel's fist slammed the altar. Enough! This is madness. You dare compare your desert cult to Christ's salvation? Maria turned to face him. You used Christ's name to cover your crimes. And now you want to use it to silence me again? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Yusuf slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn copy of the Qur'an. He didn't raise it high. He didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. She chose this book, he said. Not because it promised comfort, but because it promised truth, even when it hurt. Maria's hands found her belly again. And now I carry more than pain. I carry a life. One that came from sin, but is not sinful. There was deep silence now. Yusuf spoke softly. In Islam, no child bears the burden of another's wrongdoing. The one who hurt you will answer to God. But your child? Your child is innocent. A soul. A gift. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they don't speak for our religion. From the side, one of the younger priests, Father Emmanuel, stood up slowly. Sister Maria, he said, do you want to press charges? Her voice shook slightly. Yes. Emmanuel nodded. Then the police must be called. Now. Samuel's face turned pale. He stepped back. You would believe them over me? I would believe the broken, Emmanuel replied. For Christ came for them first. As someone moved toward the exit to make the call, Father Samuel tried to leave, but the doors were already locked by the deacon. Maria looked at Yusuf again. Why did you stand up for me? She asked. Because, he said quietly, when a woman was accused unjustly in our prophet's time, he stood with her, against the entire city. And I couldn't do less. She blinked back tears. And if I still have doubts? Still feel lost? He smiled gently. Then you're on the right path. The truth doesn't remove questions. It invites them, then answers them one by one. Yusuf stood quietly beside Maria, the tension in the church so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing on everyone's shoulders. Father Samuel remained cornered near the altar, his face a shifting mask of denial and panic. The once proud shepherd of the flock now looked small before the people he used to command. A few deacons moved slowly to the sides, unsure whether to approach him or keep their distance. The church doors remained closed, the deacon at the entrance speaking into a phone, confirming that law enforcement had been called. But time slowed. Everyone waited, some for answers, some for justice, and others just to see what would happen next. I still can't believe it, someone whispered. Maria turned toward the congregation, her face pale but composed. She stepped forward slowly, almost hesitant to speak again. But when her voice returned, it was soft and steady. I didn't plan any of this, she said. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to pray. To feel clean again. Someone in the crowd asked. Then why not go back to Jesus? Maria smiled faintly, a kind of sadness in her eyes. I didn't leave Jesus. I left the confusion around him. I found the same Jesus in the Qur'an, born of a virgin, full of miracles, messenger of God. But in Islam, he's not part of God. He's beloved by God. That made more sense to me. I wasn't replacing Christ. I was understanding him better. A young woman in the pews raised her voice hesitantly. But why Islam? I mean, women have no freedom there. Isn't that the religion where women are forced to cover up, to obey men, where two women equal one man in testimony? Maria turned to her. That's what I thought too. Until I started reading the Qur'an for myself, not just hearing what others said about it. Yusuf gently stepped up beside her. Can I explain? He asked the woman. She nodded. In Islamic courts, two women's testimony equals one man's only in specific financial contracts, because in ancient Arab society, women weren't involved in business. It was a safeguard, not an insult. In every other situation, one woman's word stands fully equal to one man's. And in spiritual worth, the Qur'an says, whoever does righteous deeds, male or female, while being a believer, we will grant them a good life. He turned to the crowd. Islam doesn't say women are inferior. It says people are responsible for their own actions, regardless of gender. But what about covering their heads? Someone else called out. Maria spoke again. When I wore the veil for the first time, it wasn't because I was forced. It was the first time I chose what happened to my body. I wasn't dressing for a man or a rule, I was dressing for God, and for me. The world saw less of me, but I saw more of myself. A few murmurs of contemplation followed. No one stood to argue. Then an older man in the back stood up, face tight with anger. She's just a victim trying to justify a bad decision. She was weak, and now she wants attention. That's why she converted. That's why she's accusing a priest. Yusuf looked at him directly, without flinching. Sir, if someone is abused, should we measure their pain by their religion? The man opened his mouth, then stopped. She came here broken, Yusuf continued. And instead of asking how to help, you ask why she made the wrong choice? You don't question the man who committed the crime, you question the woman who survived it? Maria turned to the man too. I was terrified when I accepted Islam. I kept my conversion a secret because I feared people like you. I was right to fear. Because when I needed help, all I got was silence and suspicion. The man sat down, visibly shaken. Father Samuel suddenly shouted from the altar. You think this girl is innocent? She's no longer one of us. She followed a false book and now calls herself clean? She's a disgrace. Yusuf calmly walked toward the altar, stopping halfway. Do you know what Islam says about Mary, your Mary? He asked. Samuel scoffed. Yusuf recited slowly. And when the angel said, O Mary, indeed Allah has chosen you and purified you and chosen you above the women of all the worlds. He paused. That's from the Qur'an. Chapter 3, verse 42. The silence was heavy now, not with tension, but with awe. Islam honors Mary not just as the mother of Jesus, but as a role model for all humanity. Yusuf continued. And when a woman like Maria here follows in her footsteps, choosing chastity, purity, and truth, you call her filthy? Father Samuel clenched his fists. Maria stepped forward again. The night he hurt me, he called me a traitor to Christ. He said I was lost. That I needed saving. Then he locked the door and took what didn't belong to him. Her voice didn't shake anymore. Her eyes burned with clarity. And now he calls me filthy. Because that's how guilt hides, from others, and from itself. A woman from the church's staff moved forward with tissues and handed them to Maria. She didn't know what to say, but she stayed beside her. Yusuf stepped up again. Islam doesn't claim to erase all pain, but it gives meaning to it. It tells us that trials are tests, and that God sees every tear. It doesn't matter what robes someone wears, if they hurt the innocent, they are oppressors. And God does not love oppressors. The murmuring crowd quieted again. Maria's eyes welled with tears. I still have questions, she said. I still have fears. But for the first time in my life, I also have courage. Not because I know all the answers, but because now, I'm asking the right questions. The church door opened with a creak. 2 officers stepped in. All eyes turned to them. Father Samuel backed away. Maria looked at Yusuf. Should I be afraid? He smiled softly. Not if you're walking with truth. She nodded, took a breath, and stepped forward toward the officers. And the church, once filled with hymns, echoed now with a different kind of silence, a silence of awakening. The footsteps of the police officers echoed through the grand cathedral. Their presence felt surreal, like something out of a different world now colliding with the sacred. One of them, a tall woman with her hair tied back in a neat bun, stepped forward and spoke calmly. We received a report of sexual assault. The alleged victim is Sister Maria? Maria straightened her spine. She didn't hide. Yes. That's me. The officer glanced at her with a softness that was rare in uniform. You're safe now. We just need a few details. Outside if you're ready. Maria looked once toward Father Samuel. For a moment he didn't move. His eyes darted around the room, looking for allies. But no one came forward. Not the priests. Not the choir boys. Not the loyal old women who once kissed his hands. There was only silence. He took a step back. You don't believe this nonsense, do you? He barked at the crowd. This is a setup. This is a witch hunt. No one answered. The two officers calmly approached. Father Samuel, the woman said, you're not under arrest at this moment, but we do need to take a formal statement. Please cooperate. He opened his mouth to speak again but stopped himself. A tremor of rage passed through his face. He glanced toward Maria, his glare full of venom, but she didn't flinch. As the officers gently escorted him out through the side aisle, the massive wooden doors closed behind them with a heavy thud. For a few moments, no one spoke. The stillness wasn't fear anymore, it was exhaustion. Emotional, spiritual exhaustion. Maria turned back to face the congregation. I never thought I'd be standing here like this, she said. I imagined my first public prayer as a Muslim would be in a mosque, peaceful, maybe in the back row, quietly whispering Allahu Akbar for the first time aloud. She smiled bitterly. Instead, my first public act as a Muslim was a courtroom statement, in a church. A young girl in the front row raised her hand slowly. She looked no older than 14. Can I ask you something? She said. Maria nodded gently. The girl hesitated, then asked, if Islam is really beautiful, why do so many women suffer in it? I read about women being beaten, forced into marriages, locked away from education. How do you explain that? Maria looked down for a moment, then at Yusuf. Yusuf stepped forward. That's a fair question, he said. And it deserves an honest answer. He turned to the crowd. The truth is, many Muslim women around the world do suffer. But it's not because of Islam, it's because of people who disobey Islam while pretending to follow it. He took out his phone and tapped on it. There's a verse in the Qur'an, he said, reading, where God says, O you who have believed, stand out firmly for justice, as witnesses to God, even if it be against yourselves or your parents or your relatives. He looked back up. Islam doesn't support abuse. It commands justice, even if it goes against your own family. Maria nodded slowly. I wasn't abused by a Muslim man. I was abused by someone who represented a holy institution. And when I turned to Islam, I didn't expect my pain to vanish. I expected truth. And I got it. A middle-aged man near the center asked, but what about rules in Islam that seem unfair? Like women needing a male guardian to travel in some countries? Or the idea that a man can marry 4 women? Yusuf replied, Islam came over 1,400 years ago to a world where women had no inheritance, no say in marriage, and were often buried alive as infants. It brought protection, limits, dignity. But many of those rulings were shaped by context. The Prophet himself said, do not prevent women from going to the mosque, even if it's night. He consulted women in decisions. He treated his wives with deep love and mercy. He paused. As for multiple wives, it was restricted, not encouraged. And the Qur'an says, if you cannot deal justly with more than one, then marry only one. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, remained married to one woman, Khadijah, for 25 years. He only married others after her death, for community and social reasons. Maria added, I've read how Islam gave women the right to own property, to work, to inherit, centuries before Western laws caught up. The young girl nodded thoughtfully. Another woman, dressed in a long coat and scarf, stepped forward. "I used to think Muslims hated women," she said quietly. "But maybe I was only seeing what the media showed." Yusuf smiled softly. "That's the danger of judging a faith by its followers instead of its scripture," Maria said. "I didn't become Muslim because Muslims are perfect. I became Muslim because Islam is." Gasps didn't follow that line. Only silence. A man from the side said bitterly, "But look what happened to you. You embraced Islam and then got violated. Doesn't that prove Islam couldn't protect you?" Maria turned to him, this time with no hesitation. "No. Islam didn't fail me. A man who feared the light in me did. When I wore the habit, he saw obedience. When I turned to Islam, he saw defiance. That's when he struck." She raised her chin. "Don't blame Islam for what power-hungry men do to silence women." Yusuf folded his arms. "Would you blame a hospital because a corrupt doctor harmed someone inside it? Or blame education because a teacher misused it?" The man fell silent. Maria touched her belly gently. "I was violated. I am pregnant. But I am not unclean. And this child is not cursed." One woman burst into tears. An elderly nun sobbed silently into her hands. Maria's voice cracked, but she continued. "In Islam, this child is a soul. A creation of God. Not defined by how it entered this world, but by what it may become." Yusuf stepped closer. "God does not judge by beginnings. He judges by truth, by sincerity, by what we do when we're tested." A few people in the pews began to weep openly now. One woman asked, "Sister Maria, if we wanted to learn more about Islam, would you teach us?" Maria smiled, for the first time without pain. "I'm still learning myself. But yes, I'll sit with you. I'll read with you. And I'll pray with you." A voice near the door called out, "The officers want your statement now." Maria nodded. She turned to Yusuf. "Will you wait for me?" "I'll be here," he said. "And when you're ready, we'll keep answering questions." She stepped out slowly, her figure fading into the hall beyond. And in that sacred space, what had begun as accusation had become revelation. The heavy wooden doors of the church swung closed behind Sister Maria as she disappeared with the officers to give her formal statement. Inside, the room sat in stunned silence. The congregation remained, but something in the air had shifted. Anger had given way to reflection. Suspicion had been replaced with questions. Yusuf stood near the pulpit, still calm, still watching. He didn't carry the fire of a preacher or the sharpness of a debater. His voice had not been raised once. Yet the truth he had spoken now echoed more loudly than the church bells ever had. "I don't know what to think," a young man muttered, breaking the silence. "I was born Catholic. I was baptized here. But today, everything feels upside down." A nun, perhaps in her late 50s, spoke from the second row. "That's because we were taught that faith is a ceremony. But what she did, what that girl did today, that was faith in raw form." The room murmured in agreement. "I still don't understand Islam," someone said near the back. "It feels foreign. Complicated." Yusuf turned to the voice. "You're right. From a distance, it can seem that way. But if you come close, and listen, not to what the world says, but to what the Qur'an says, you'll see. It's not foreign. It's not complicated. It's familiar. It speaks the same truth you've known all your life, but with clarity." A man raised his hand. He looked older, perhaps in his 60s, his hair gray, his eyes tired. "You say it's familiar? Then tell me, how does your Islam explain what just happened to her? A woman accepts your faith, and hours later she is violated. If your God is just, where was he?" Yusuf didn't flinch. He took a moment before answering. "He was there," he said quietly. "When she whispered the Shahida alone in her room, he heard her. When she cried in pain and betrayal, he recorded every tear. When no one believed her, he never stopped watching. He was always there. But trials are not punishments. They are tests. Not to break us, but to show us who we are, and what we believe. The man narrowed his eyes. So he just lets evil happen? Watches while women are hurt? Yusuf stepped forward slightly. In this world, people are given free will. And some misuse it. But don't confuse God's patience with absence. The one who wrongs will face him. Not just in court, but on the day when every secret is exposed. And the one who suffered will be honored by him in ways this world cannot imagine. A woman asked from the corner, "But doesn't Islam say women need 4 witnesses to prove rape?" Yusuf turned toward her. That's a common misunderstanding. In Islamic law, 4 witnesses are required only when someone accuses another of adultery publicly. But in cases of rape, it is treated as a criminal act, not adultery. Medical evidence, physical signs, the victim's testimony, all of these are considered valid. The 4-witness requirement was to protect people from false public accusations, not to silence victims. There was a shift in the room. A collective exhale. As if a myth had just collapsed. A teenage boy, hesitant but curious, stood up. "Can I ask, if Islam respects women so much, why can men marry 4 wives, but women can't have more than 1 husband?" The room stiffened slightly, waiting to see if Yusuf would avoid the question. He didn't. "That's a good question," he said. "And one that deserves an honest answer. Islam allowed polygyny, under strict justice, not because men are superior, but because of the realities of that time. Men died in battle. Widows needed protection. Orphans needed fathers. Islam regulated something that was already happening, and placed limits where there were none." He looked around the room. "But it also warned men, if you can't be just, then marry only 1. And as for women having multiple husbands, it was forbidden not out of oppression, but because of lineage, responsibility, and clarity. A child has a right to know their father, their name, their inheritance. Islam isn't just about rights, it's also about structure." Someone asked, "But can that be relevant today?" Yusuf nodded. "Islam's principles are timeless. But its applications can adapt to context. That's why we have scholars. Not every verse is about rules, many are about wisdom. And mercy." Just then, the church doors opened again. Maria entered slowly, her scarf now pulled over her head, not wrapped like a hijab, but respectfully draped. Her face was red but calm. The congregation turned, watching her as if seeing her for the first time. Yusuf stepped toward her. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "It's done. They took my report. There'll be an investigation." There was a moment of silence. Then a voice called from the back. "Can I ask you something, directly?" Maria looked surprised but nodded. "Yes." A woman in her 30s stood up. Her eyes were sharp but not hostile. "You say Islam gave you peace. But if peace is what you wanted, why didn't you just walk away from all religions? Why jump from one faith into another? Isn't that just trading one cage for another?" Maria smiled faintly. "I didn't trade cages," she said. "I walked out of a room where I couldn't breathe, and into a garden I didn't know existed." She took a step forward. "I was never forced into Islam. No one recruited me. No one pressured me. It was just me and a book. And when I read the Qur'an, it didn't tell me I was worthless. It didn't say I was the root of man's downfall. It told me I was honored. That my modesty was strength. That my silence wasn't weakness. That my prayers went straight to God, no middleman. That my pain mattered. That my tears were seen." She paused, her voice softening. "I found God again. Not in a symbol. Not in a statue. But in words that spoke directly to my heart." A few people wiped their eyes. A priest who had been silent all along finally stood. His face was old, lined with years of service and wear. "I have served this church for 42 years, he said. "And never once have I seen a day like this. I don't agree with everything I've heard. But I do know this: truth does not fear questions. And today, you have forced us to ask questions we have long avoided." He turned to Maria. "Whether or not you stay in Islam, you have reminded us all that faith is not obedience to men. It is surrender to God." Maria blinked back tears. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Yusuf looked at her, and in that moment, no words were needed. She was home. The sun outside had begun to dip slightly, casting soft amber light through the stained glass windows. The colors scattered over the pews, reds, greens, and blues dancing across the faces of those seated in stunned attention. A place once meant for sermons had now become a courtroom, a sanctuary, and a classroom all at once. Sister Maria took a seat in the front row, her scarf still gently resting on her head. Yusuf stood beside her, not as her defender anymore, but as her brother in faith, quiet, present, and ready. A man cleared his throat. He had been silent all along, middle-aged, suited, and visibly skeptical. "I've been listening carefully," he said. "And I'll admit I admire your courage, Sister Maria. But I have to ask, how can you trust a religion that doesn't allow love? Isn't Islam the faith that forbids marrying non-Muslims? What if you fall in love with someone who doesn't share your faith? Is that love cursed?" Maria tilted her head thoughtfully. But it was Yusuf who stood first. "I'll answer if you don't mind," he said. The man gestured with a nod. "Love," Yusuf said slowly, "is not forbidden in Islam. But like everything else, it has a purpose and a boundary. Islam doesn't forbid emotions. It guides them. Not to stifle the heart, but to protect it." He walked slowly across the aisle, as though speaking to each person in the room. "In Islam, faith is not just a belief, it's the foundation of every bond. Marriage isn't just about passion, it's about partnership, purpose, and destiny. That's why Muslims are encouraged to marry believers, so their home is built on shared values, not silent wars." The man frowned. "But isn't that restrictive?" Yusuf smiled gently. "Is it restrictive to plant seeds in soil that nourishes them instead of concrete? Islam doesn't forbid love across faiths, but it cautions us. Because love without shared direction becomes a tug-of-war. One pulls toward the mosque, the other toward a bar. One seeks prayer, the other scoffs at it. That's not love. That's slow warfare." Maria spoke up, her voice calm. "Before I converted, I had feelings for someone who was kind to me. Kind, but not a believer. When I told him I was reading the Qur'an, he laughed. He said I was too smart for that desert religion. That broke something in me. Not because he disagreed, but because he mocked what gave me peace." She looked directly at the suited man. "Islam didn't forbid my love. It revealed what kind of love I truly deserved." The man was silent. Not defensive, just thoughtful. From the far left, a woman stood up. Her voice was soft but steady. "Can I ask something?" she said. "It's not about law or theology. It's about you, Maria." Maria turned to her with warmth. "Of course." The woman hesitated. When it happened, when you were attacked, didn't you ask God why? I mean, even after embracing Islam, you were still hurt. Didn't that shake your faith?" A hush fell over the room again. Maria's gaze lowered. Her hands folded in her lap. She nodded slowly. "I asked him every night," she said. "I screamed into my pillow. I looked up at the ceiling and cried, 'Why would you let this happen after I gave myself to you?'" Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. But the question changed after a few nights. It went from "why me?" to "what now?" She looked up again, steady now. "And that's when I realized, Islam never promised me safety from pain. It promised me purpose through it. It didn't promise comfort. It promised clarity. Yusuf added. Even prophets suffered. Mary was accused of immorality. Joseph was thrown in prison. The Prophet Muhammad was slandered, boycotted, and stoned. But they didn't stop believing. Because God never said there wouldn't be storms, only that we wouldn't face them alone. The woman sat down, covering her mouth to hide her emotions. A teen boy, fidgeting in the middle row, raised his hand shyly. Can I ask something small? Everyone turned to him. He looked straight at Maria. Are you going to keep the baby? Maria looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether she could carry one more truth forward. Then she nodded. Yes, she said. I will. But people might judge you, the boy said. Even Muslims. They might call your child names. She smiled, but not bitterly. Then they don't know their religion. Because Allah doesn't judge a child by how they entered this world. And He doesn't define a woman by what was done to her without her consent. If I abandon this child, I'd be punishing someone innocent, just like I was once. Yusuf spoke softly, almost like a brother. In Islam, we believe every soul is born on the fitra, pure, innocent, inclined to truth. And that includes your child. Maria placed a hand on her stomach, almost instinctively. I won't let my pain become their inheritance. They will be raised in light. The congregation had nothing to say now. Some sat crying. Others bowed their heads in reverence. A man from the church staff approached Yusuf quietly. Would it be okay if we asked you for a few Qur'ans? I think some people here want to read for themselves. Yusuf nodded. Of course. And not just Qur'ans. I'll bring translations, notes, even books on the Prophet's life. Truth doesn't fear examination. The man smiled, quietly amazed. Maria stood once again. Before today, I thought my shame would define me. But now I know, it's not what happened to me that defines me. It's what I choose after it. Yusuf added. And today, you chose courage. She looked at him with grateful eyes. And you chose to stand beside me, she said. When everyone else stayed seated. The light from the stained glass fell on them again, this time not as scattered fragments, but as one golden beam, falling quietly across the floor. The old wooden floor beneath the pews creaked as more people stood, not to leave, but to inch closer. Conversations that would have been whispered just hours ago were now voiced aloud, in full view, without fear. The atmosphere inside the church had changed from tense to transformed. One of the younger priests, Father Emmanuel, stepped forward. He had been watching silently all this time. His collar was slightly loosened, his face calm but lined with a quiet conflict. I need to say something, he began, addressing the room, not the pulpit. I don't know what the future of this church looks like after today. I don't know what will happen to Father Samuel, and I don't know how to explain to my superiors that we failed to protect someone we called sister. He turned to Maria. But I know this. You showed more strength in standing here than most men show in a lifetime. And whatever faith you now follow, it's clearly working. Maria gave a small nod, but didn't speak. Her eyes stayed soft, not defensive. She no longer had anything to prove. Yusuf watched, his arms loosely crossed, his gaze scanning the crowd. His presence had gone from unfamiliar to almost essential. He hadn't preached, yet hearts had shifted. He hadn't attacked, but beliefs had been questioned. He hadn't converted anyone, but many were closer to truth than ever before. A woman stepped forward now, tall, sharp-featured, her face serious. I have a question, she said directly to Maria. Maria gave her attention without flinching. Let's say we believe you. Let's say we even begin to accept that Islam isn't what the media shows. But what now? Do you want us all to become Muslim? To leave everything we've known? Maria shook her head gently. No, she said. I want you to seek, to ask, to read. Because I did all of that in secret for months before I ever whispered the Shahida. I didn't change overnight. I wrestled. I wept. I feared losing everything. But in the end, I chose what gave me peace, not what gave me comfort. Yusuf added, Islam doesn't need converts. It needs sincerity. Even if you never say the words I believe, if you seek truth with a clean heart, you're already walking the path. The woman asked quietly, But what about Jesus? Yusuf smiled gently. We love him too. Maybe more than you know. He recited from memory. Indeed, the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, is a messenger of Allah, and his word, cast into Mary, and a spirit from him. He paused. That's in the Qur'an. Jesus is called the Messiah. Born of a virgin. A miracle worker. A bringer of truth. And he will return before the end of time. A few gasps again, but this time soft ones, surprise, not skepticism. Another man stood up near the side door, older, wearing a hearing aid. His voice was shaky. If Islam honors Jesus, why doesn't it accept the cross? The resurrection? Yusuf looked at him respectfully. Because Islam believes God doesn't abandon his prophets. That Jesus was raised, alive, not crucified. That it was made to appear so, but he was saved. And he will return, not to establish a new religion, but to restore monotheism and justice. He stepped closer, voice low but strong. And when he returns, Muslims will stand behind him, not against him. A hush of reverence spread over the room. Maria sat down again, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. She hadn't spoken of the child in a while, not since declaring her decision to keep it. But now someone brought it back up. A voice from the back, male, unfamiliar, bold. What about the child? He asked, and everyone turned. What will he be? Christian? Muslim? Illegitimate? What will you tell him when he asks who his father is? It was a cruel question. Or maybe just a hard one. But either way, it landed like stone in the middle of a lake. Maria looked up slowly. She didn't look hurt. Just tired. I will tell him, she said, that his mother survived what tried to destroy her. That she turned toward God instead of turning bitter. That he is not a curse, but a mercy in disguise. Yusuf added, in Islam, lineage matters. But dignity matters more. This child will not carry the burden of another's crime. He will carry only what he builds with his own hands, what he believes with his own heart. The man from the back crossed his arms. But society won't forget. Maria's gaze sharpened. Then I'll teach my child to live above society's memory and walk with God's mercy. Silence again. Then, slowly, one person clapped. It wasn't enthusiastic. Just honest. Then another followed. And another. Until the church was filled with the soft sound of hands meeting, not for spectacle, but for support. The doors opened again. 2 officers re-entered, this time alone. They walked down the aisle and spoke quietly to Father Emmanuel, who then turned to the crowd. Father Samuel has been taken into custody, he announced. There will be a full investigation. No one is above accountability. No cheers followed. No applause. Only a deep sense of gravity. Of something sacred being repaired, or at least begun. Yusuf turned to Maria. Do you want to go? She shook her head. Not yet. He smiled. Then stay. You've already rebuilt something here. Another woman walked up, this time with a little girl in tow. The girl looked around 6, wearing a pink dress and white sandals. She wants to say something, the woman whispered. The girl looked at Maria and said, You're brave. Maria's lips trembled, but she smiled. You are too. Don't ever forget it. The girl handed her a folded piece of paper. A simple crayon drawing, a woman with a scarf, holding hands with the child. Maria looked at it for a long time, then folded it and placed it close to her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. The church, now nearly evening lit, felt lighter than it had all day. A sacred space broken by truth. And slowly being rebuilt with it too. The fading sunlight slanted through the stained glass windows like gentle arms stretching across the church floor. The day had started with accusation, shock, and disbelief. Now, as the sky deepened into evening, a calm stillness filled the air, one born not of tradition, but of truth having been spoken and heard. Sister Maria remained seated in the front pew. Her hands rested over her stomach, and the folded drawing the little girl had given her was still close to her heart. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't trembling. She was just still. Yusuf sat a few feet away, listening, present but not imposing. He had said all he needed to say. His words weren't sermons, they were seeds. And he could already sense that many had taken root. Father Emmanuel stood at the altar now, no longer behind it like a shield. He faced the people directly. "There is no script for what we've witnessed today," he began. "No liturgical instruction on how to handle a sister accusing a priest, or a Muslim boy reminding us of our own scripture's silence when it comes to injustice." His voice didn't tremble, though his hands occasionally did. "I've been a priest for 28 years. And never once have I felt as close to God's presence in this church as I have today, not because the music played, or a sermon was preached, but because someone told the truth. And others listened." He looked at Maria. "You reminded us of something sacred. Faith is not a performance. It is a private fire that refuses to be extinguished, even when the world pours shame on it." Maria nodded slightly. Her eyes were soft, open, but unashamed. Another man stood up in the audience. "Can I ask one last question before we go?" Father Emmanuel looked at him and smiled faintly. "You don't need my permission anymore. This is your house, too." The man turned to Yusuf. "You've said many beautiful things about your religion. About truth. About justice. But here's my question, are you here to convert us?" Yusuf stood slowly. The room turned quiet again. "No," he said. "I'm here to invite you, to think. To reflect. To question what you've inherited, and what you've ignored. I'm not selling anything. I'm simply offering the reminder that truth is not something we own. It's something we return to." He let the words breathe. "Faith is not a badge. It's a burden. One that must be carried with integrity. And you don't have to become Muslim to be honest with yourself. But if, in your heart, you hear something that sounds like home, don't silence it just because it scares you." The man sat back down. His face wasn't converted, but it was softened. Maria stood now. "I came here today expecting to be thrown out," she said. "Or arrested. Or cursed. Instead, I saw God move through strangers." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "I no longer wear the cross. I wear no badge. But I still love Jesus. I love Mary. And I love the one who sent them. And now, I love the Prophet Muhammad, because he reminded the world that God is not distant. He is closer than our own heartbeat." A teenage girl raised her hand. "Will you name your baby Muhammad?" The question made a few people laugh softly, even Maria. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I know I will raise this child with the knowledge that no soul enters this world by mistake." Yusuf nodded in approval. Father Emmanuel turned again to the crowd. "If anyone here still feels conflicted, good. Conflict means your soul is awake. You don't have to understand everything today. But don't run from what you've seen. Wrestle with it. Pray on it. Read. Ask." He walked over to Maria and extended a hand. "Even if we no longer share the same creed," he said, "I will never forget what you reminded me today, that truth matters more than comfort. And God cannot be hidden behind robes. She took his hand. Thank you for listening, when it would have been easier to turn away. People began standing, one by one. Some were silent. Some were wiping tears. Others embraced one another quietly. A woman approached Yusuf. You said earlier that you'd bring us Qur'ans? Yes, he replied. I'll leave a box here by the front door. You can take one. No one will follow up. You're free to read or ignore it. That's between you and God. She nodded. I'd like to read it. Then begin with chapter 19, he said. It's called Maryam. About the woman you've loved your whole life, and the child she carried. Maria let out a gentle breath. That's the chapter that broke me, she said, and rebuilt me. Soon, the congregation began to disperse, slowly but with a strange reverence, as if leaving something behind, or taking something invisible with them. Yusuf and Maria remained the last two in the room. He stood at the edge of the pews, watching the fading colors on the walls. You did something incredible today, he said. Maria looked down. I was just trying to tell the truth. And that, he said, is what makes it incredible. Most people hide behind fear. You walked through it. She glanced toward the altar, then toward the exit. I never imagined my first public act as a Muslim would be in a church. He smiled. And yet, maybe it had to be. Maybe truth has to go where silence has lived too long. She nodded. Yusuf? Yes? Why did you stay the whole time? He looked at her without hesitation. Because the Prophet Muhammad said, help your brother, whether he is the oppressor or the oppressed. And today, you were the one being crushed. I couldn't walk away from that. A beat passed. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet. For standing. He shook his head. No. Thank you for rising. And with that, the two of them walked slowly toward the door, not in shame, not in defeat, but with the quiet dignity of people who had endured a storm and were now stepping back into the world not to escape it, but to change it. Outside, the sky was no longer bright. But neither was it dark. It was twilight. A time when the world pauses. And something new begins.